Roger begrudgingly posed for his mother, giving her a boyish scowl as the camera flashed. His Cairn Terrier, Joyce, sat beside him with a much less sour expression. The photo captured the worn texture of the maroon carpeted staircase, the light bouncing off of blonde, shedded dog hair. His ill-fitting scout uniform only worsened his childlike appearance. "Come on, honey, you can give me a better face than that," his mother nagged as the Polaroid developed in her hand. "You only have so many years left as a Boy Scout. Why can't you just have a little fun with it?" "Because it's gay, and I don't care about it." Roger had spent the summer begging not to start 9th grade in the Boy Scouts. Tragically, this identity would follow him to the bitter end of high school. He brooded over how poorly it represented him, as being a Boy Scout isn't exactly menacing. "You'll get a scholarship if you stay. It'll pay off big time in the end," Pamela pushed, tilting her head at his admittingly charming display of homophobia. Joyce watched as the bickering pair backed out of the driveway. Roger caught her eyes following them out the bay windows as they drove out of view. He kept his head turned away from his mother, silently consumed in thought. "I'm sorry Dad isn't coming with you, but you'll be with tons of boys from other troops. You might even make some friends." "It'd be a miracle," he scoffed, quickly refocusing on the scenery and his inner pessimism. Dad not being there was the only thing that could possibly save his night. Since the diagnosis, Roger's father, Nathan, had become inescapably overbearing, constantly pushing and critiquing his social skills, despite the fact that his shitty genetics caused the autism. He would psychoanalyze his son and apply none of his findings to himself. In his adult years, Roger would come to the conclusion that without the patriarchy of the old days, a man like his father would have never reproduced. Little did he know that the passivity of men in his generation would lead to the sexual starvation of his son, and on top of it, he had the nerve to give him advice on girls. He winced as his mother pulled into the parking lot, clinging on to his last moments of peace before the most anticipated event of the summer, the Boy Scouts of Long Island Cringe Campout. It's marketed as a rite of passage for scouts entering high school, and a chance for graduating scouts to pass on their knowledge. But Roger knew it would be a night of listening to senior boys perform when they'd rather be fucking their girlfriends or taking hits off a gravity bong. "I believe in miracles," she said smugly as he slammed the car door in response. He entered the camp dining hall to see an arrangement of chairs filled with boys seated by troop. He took note of his own troop in his peripheral, but dreaded joining them. The darling of his troop was Joseph, and his father, Russ, was the scoutmaster. They both shared the same intrusive energy, always striking up friendly conversations with him that he knew were secretly condescending. Roger had spent his elementary and middle school years watching Joseph be adored by teachers and thrive socially. The way he was praised like some little douchebag prince, while he was constantly reprimanded for just existing as himself, was ridiculous. And if that wasn't enough to make Roger lose his mind, there was one event that solidified his place on the kill list. In early middle school, Joseph shared last period English with him. Roger generally enjoyed the class when not dwelling on his presence there. Miss Conrad announced that all grades were welcome to come to the Halloween dance on Friday before the holiday. "Can we bring dates?" Roger asked, raising his hand. "It's not that kind of dance, but maybe we'll see some cool group costumes," she replied, trying to salvage the conversation. Two girls sitting with Joseph bursted into quiet giggling. "Ew!" one said. "He's so retarded," said the other. He smiled and laughed along with them at Roger's misery. Joseph had a gang of female friends, and those two cunts were always the closest. Roger knew he would talk shit about him with those girls in private, but evilly humiliating him in public was a new low. That trio would take the first bullets when the time came. As his eyes scanned the room, a chubby red-haired boy hunched over a PSP grabbed his attention. He stealthily avoided his troop as he approached him. "Hey, I'm Roger. What are you playing?" "Oh, hi, I'm Drew, and it's Birth by Sleep." Drew's eyes barely left the screen as he spoke. "Oh, cool. I love Kingdom Hearts. Do you like Final Fantasy too?" "Yeah, I have Dissidia. If you have a PSP, we could play sometime." "Sure we could." "Please sit with your troop," Drew's Scoutmaster interrupted while plucking the PSP from his hands. "We'll be doing group activities soon. You guys can talk in a bit." Drew waved a little goodbye as Roger nervously walked to his seat. As he sat down behind Joseph, he and the other boys smirked and chuckled over their seats. They always did that when Roger innocently came around, laughing like they just heard the funniest thing. The freshmen silenced as senior scouts gathered around a whiteboard wheeled at the front of the room. Each of them took turns detailing upcoming food drives, fundraisers, and other community service events. Roger's eyes scanned the crowd as he tuned out the presentation. He took notice of how many dads volunteered to supervise, not to mention the ones who are scoutmasters. He felt a small wave of remorse grip his heart for celebrating his dad not being there. He didn't mean to push him away so much. He just wished that his dad would stop turning every conversation into a lecture about his disability. When he was little, they would watch movies together, go on fun hikes, and talk about philosophy. Now all he does is label every meaningless behavior quirk as autistic and boss him around about it. Still, Roger began to feel very alone in the room, almost orphaned when surrounded by so many strange parents he didn't recognize. With the most boring part of the campout out of the way, he and Drew were finally free to reunite for dinner. Drew was seated alone at the furthest table with no PSP to distract him from his loneliness. "Did they take your PSP?" Roger asked, gladly sitting far from his troop. "Yeah, I can't have it back until tomorrow." "Is your dad here?" Drew let out a short exhale with a grin. "I've never met my dad." Roger's heart dropped a bit. He didn't mean to ask such a prying question. Drew did seem to have a sense of humor about it, but the subject still revived his guilt. He felt even more regret for rejoicing in his dad's absence that night. "Don't look behind you," Drew exclaimed to change the subject. Roger turned to see the rest of his troop, along with Drew's, staring and whispering, each clique laughing at the two dorkiest kids befriending each other. "I hate everyone so fucking much," Roger muttered. "I get it. Do you see that kid with the black curly hair?" Roger gestured towards Joseph. "Yeah? His dad is my scoutmaster, and he's the biggest dick I've ever encountered." "Oh god, he sounds like Jake," Drew said as Roger looked around, searching. "He's not in Boy Scouts, but he was on my soccer team when my mom still forced me to play. His dad was the coach and let him be goalie every single game. I've been screaming for my mom to let me quit Boy Scouts since the 7th grade. She'll crack eventually," Drew said, not knowing how impossible that would be. Roger's mind began to scheme. He pushed his remorse down and conjured up a way to make use of his freedom that night. "If we're both here alone, we can do whatever we want." Drew was enticed. He usually spent scout events bored in some corner, much like Roger. Together, they could find a way to have their own fun. "What do you want to do? Do you want to sneak out tonight and explore? We could get your PSP back." "Sure," Drew agreed devilishly. "We could leave our cabins and meet up at like midnight." "Yeah, I like to stay up anyway." The boys felt a rush as they followed the group outside to the fire pit and fields, no one being wise to their secret plan. Some of the boys ran off to play sports, while Drew and Roger stuck around the fire. Scoutmaster Russ took the opportunity to address Roger's troop and the other boys surrounding them. "These are going to be some of your most important years as a scout. You're all old enough now to really start impacting the community. You're going to start feeling what it's like to affect people in a good way. A lot of kids leave scouts at this age and miss out on some of the best parts. Whether you choose to stay is up to you." Russ's eyes fell on Roger as he finished. He had the tendency to do that, ending his sentences as though they were directed at him specifically, like he intuitively sensed that he was an unruly kid. Roger squirmed inside. angrily denying that his plot with Drew validated him being viewed this way. Like most children on the spectrum, he had been scolded most of his life by unwitting adults, his subsequent shame leading him to misbehave in ever more creative ways. He just wanted the same attention given to a boy like his son, Joseph, even if his actions didn't warrant it. He only wished to be special in a way other than special ed. At around 10, the troops reunited to retire into their assigned cabins. Roger and Drew took note of each other's cabin numbers and their distance from each other. This wasn't the first time he had to sleep in the same room as Joseph. There had been many other scout trips over the years, but the situation never grew less irritable. The next 2 hours were only made tolerable by the perfect view out of the window nearest to him. The vivid light of the waxing half-moon helped him refrain from drifting off. He rose from his bed and crept diagonally across the cabin. He paused at the door, allowing enough seconds to pass to ensure his roommates were asleep. He took a long glance at Russ's sleeping body. He had mastered the art of not waking his parents ages ago, but he had no baseline for what could wake this man. He slipped out and shut the door, praying to God he didn't wake anyone. Across the campground, he could see Drew exiting his cabin. The pair quietly approached each other. "I was gonna be so pissed if you were asleep." "I never sleep," Roger stated honestly, with dark rings under his eyes to back his claim. "So, you want to try the doors of the main hall? There's a backroom office area. It's probably where they keep confiscated items." Roger nodded, knowing it wasn't likely they'd be able to break in. As they walked, his gaze returned to the moon. He admired how its light bled through the leaves of the trees in the darkness, making the branches look like skeletons on an X-ray. The boys reached the main doors and were met by the expected but disappointing reality that they were locked. They walked the perimeter of the building, discovering a white metal door that appeared to lead straight into the back room. It too, of course, was locked. Inspecting the metal keyhole, Drew pulled out a paperclip. "You think I can pick it?" "You can try, but we might set off the alarm if it's an emergency exit door." Drew cautiously dug the paperclip into the hole, both of them grimacing at the sound of it scraping inside the lock. "So, if both of our troops are here together, that means you're going to Old Brook High School with me, right?" "Holy fuck, I didn't even realize that." Roger was giddy at the thought that this was the start of a very rebellious friendship. After a few more minutes of noisy fiddling, Drew was at a loss. "This lock is impossible, and I have to piss. Do you want to walk to the bathrooms with me?" "Yeah, it's a good alibi if we get caught." The freestanding bathrooms were only a short distance from the hall, but Roger still found time to once again admire the moon. "You see that?" he asked. "Oh, yeah." Drew looked up for a few seconds, but the moon didn't seem to have the same allure for him as it did for Roger. After they did their business, Roger held Drew back from leaving the stalls so quickly. He was not going to let the night end without some kind of mischief. From his hoodie, he pulled out his favorite tool for deviance, a wide black Sharpie marker. Drew smiled in approval, watching him remove the cap. With the artfulness of an old master, he adorned the stall door with a robust penis. Drew's cackling grew so loud he had to muffle himself with his sleeve. He nearly choked, realizing the series of lines next to it formed a swastika. "Your turn." Roger handed over the marker, eager to watch him add to the masterpiece. Not daring enough to be anti-Semitic, Drew simply wrote "tits" in all caps above a crude pair of circles and dots. "Nice," Roger complimented while taking back the marker. Using his criminal mind, he threw it into the trash and hid it beneath a wet layer of paper towels. "Good call," Drew said while holding open the door. This wasn't Roger's first act of vandalism, and he was not going to be punished this time. The delinquents exited the restroom high on adrenaline. Riding a wave of disobedience, they looked out to the spooky, dense tree line. "You want to go in the woods?" Drew asked with his eyes wide as the moonlight reflected off his glasses. "Yes." With no flashlights, the two stayed close as they stepped off the campgrounds and into the black forest. "Put your number in my phone so we can text before school starts." Roger used the light of Drew's phone to guide their steps as he entered his details. They had the foresight not to let the campground lights fade out of view behind them. Reaching what seemed to be their limit, they stopped and listened to the light breeze pass through the branches. Though neither of them would admit it, they were frightened by how little they could see. Drew held out his phone at arm's length with the screen illuminated. "Roger, can you see that?" He strained his eyes for a few moments before recognizing the shape of a small cave a few feet to their left. "Yeah." As they walked to the mouth of the cave, they took note of its long, ovular shape. Within Roger's autismal mind lay an arsenal of movie quotes, and he had one perfect for the occasion. "Geez, you got a big pussy!" he shouted. The boys laughed in merriment as the reference was echoed back to them. He inched his way into the opening of the cave. "Are you fucking serious, dude?" "What?" Roger asked, abruptly stopping. "I mean, you can go in if you want. I'm not going in, though." Roger proceeded into the cave, accepting the challenge. "You're gonna die, dude." "Fine by me," he sang back. His tone masked the genuineness of his potential last words. As he carefully navigated the rocky floor, his senses detected something strange. Heat. There was warmth towards the back of the cave, perhaps evidence of an animal dwelling inside. If this was the case, why hadn't it awoken to defend its territory? "Geez, you got a big pussy!" The voice was so close he could feel breath on his skin. "Jesus Christ, why did you scream that again?" Drew yelled back in rage over his near heart attack. "I didn't." By the grace of God alone, he bolted out of the cave without injury. Drew felt the wind pass him like a bullet. He took off after Roger with desperate speed. Their vision was locked on the campground lights, no awareness given to the surrounding woods. "What was that?" Drew gasped. At that moment, Roger couldn't manage a response. He had never been superstitious. For many years, he would deceive himself into believing it was just some pedophile squatting there. Smothered under layers of rationalization was the notion that the cave was put in front of him by no coincidence, and his voice hadn't been echoed in the first place. Their paths split as they rapidly charged the steps of their separate cabins. Roger swung open the door with zero grace, his entire troop groaning in response. Russ yanked the chain on his bedside lamp, revealing his most devoted scout at the edge of his bed. "I got scared coming back from the bathroom." The room erupted into mockery. He could hear Joseph whisper, "Pussy," to one of his underlings. Russ glared as Roger climbed back under the covers, knowing the boy was up to no good. Roger was comforted by the presence of Russ and the other boys, but only out of fear. He once again longed for the security of his father. A wave of embarrassment followed this. Being called a pussy just moments earlier sank in. Joseph dug himself a deeper grave with every personal slight he dished out. Though it took hours, he eventually fell asleep. He awoke to the sound of his troop packing their duffel bags, the sun hanging in the half-moon's place. He carelessly stuffed his belongings into his bag like the rest of the teenage boys. Russ hurried the group as Roger hurled it over his shoulder. The campgrounds had been eerie and desolate the night before, but the sunlight washed away this energy. The welcoming smell of the breakfast buffet filled the dining hall. He dumped his pack at the corner table closest to the windows. He hungrily loaded his plate with waffles and sausage patties, dousing the pile with a full ladle of maple syrup. He chipmunked forkfuls of the sweet mixture into his mouth. He was seated facing a floor-to-ceiling view of the forest he had explored the night prior. He searched for any indication of the cave, but even in daylight his sight was limited. "I got my PSP back!" Drew plopped himself across the table from Roger, obstructing his view of the woods. "My scoutmaster had it with him the whole time, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. I couldn't sleep at all last night after we heard that thing out there." He noticed a thin red scratch above Drew's eyebrow. "You have a cut on your face. I only slept for like 2 hours." Drew grazed his fingers across his face until landing on the thin scab. "Whoa, yeah, your hand is fucked up too." He pointed to the hand gripping the fork. Roger inspected himself and found similar marks around his knuckles and forearms. They had made such a panicked escape they hadn't felt the sting of the tiny cuts. "I looked a little for the cave. It's too deep to see, though." Drew twisted around for a brief glance. "I'm not going back in there to find it." "Someone drew a dick in the bathroom," announced a boy at a neighboring table. "What? Come on, dude, I can show you." The squad of scouts took off to witness the spectacle. Roger and Drew fought to contain their pride, remaining seated to avoid drawing attention to themselves. "There's no way we're getting caught," Roger thought to himself. "It's impossible to prove it was us. We got rid of the marker." "He's looking at you," Drew whispered. He could feel Russ's eyes burning the back of his neck. He didn't dare make eye contact. "He's gone now." Russ and a few other scoutmasters left to investigate the stalls. "My dad's gonna be here any second. We just have to get to our parents' cars and we're safe. I'm gonna text my mom." Drew pulled out his phone while Roger chugged the rest of his OJ. The wanted criminals dumped their trash and raced for the door with their packs. Freedom was only a few feet away when Russ returned from the stalls. He towered over Roger, boiling with anger and disappointment. He couldn't prove Roger's guilt, but his expression conveyed that he was the prime suspect. Russ was much more intimidating than Roger's father, and he'd punish the brat himself if he could. Roger shrunk down and scurried past him like a mouse. Drew followed, looking over his shoulder to see him still staring. The parking lot was like the gates of heaven to the fugitives. Roger could see his dad sitting in his familiar CRV. "Is that your dad?" "Yeah. I don't know if my mom's here." Drew's phone buzzed with a text reading, "I see you." He motioned towards an old sedan. Inside, Roger could see a very large woman with red curly hair and glasses. She was wearing a Stop and Shop uniform. "That's my mom. See you at school." Drew lifted his hand for a fist bump. "Text me," Roger said, returning the gesture. Nathan stepped out of the car with a smile. He was ecstatic to see his isolated son being so friendly with another boy. "Who was that?" "That's Drew. He's going to Old Brook with me." "That's great!" He cheered, shutting Roger's bag in the trunk. He wouldn't have delivered such praise if he knew of their mischievous deeds. With little evidence to go on, Russ abandoned pursuing the incident, sparing Roger the consequences of his crime. He believed whatever future punishment he brought upon himself would suffice. The car ride home was joyous and peaceful. Making a friend meant Roger was free from his father's nagging, if only for a minute. He was reminded of how strong their connection used to be, before the diagnosis hindered their relationship. Why couldn't he live the life of a normal boy? Why must the world provoke him to such delinquency? "I wish I was a good kid," he cried to himself. Guilt weighed heavily on his conscience, but not enough to correct the tragic path he walked on.